Good afternoon. I just want to welcome you back to A Courageous Heart. And I'm happy to be here this afternoon with our guest, Pastor Carlos Olivar. He is the pastor of Table of Encounters on Main Street, 1415 Main. And his family has been long-time attendees of that church, and the building has quite a history for them. So he's here to share with us the story of his family's relationship with that ministry and a little bit about his life story. Welcome, Pastor.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
For having me and accepting our story. It's a blessing to be able to be here today.
Yeah, so we actually met across the street from there at 7-Eleven, and it was kind of like a divine appointment, I think, for the Lord to connect up Courageous Heart Ministries and Table of Encounter. And from that point, I got to know your family and what you guys do, your interest in the community. So it was a very recent chance, that I had to come and sit in one of the services where you shared your testimony.
Yes.
And so your testimony just really opened up a lot of a completely different view of the walk that you have with the Lord and the struggle and the journey that you actually took. So I would like you to maybe take us back to the beginning and a little bit about where you come from, who you are, and your family, if you can.
Yes. So my mother is from El Salvador. My father is from Honduras. I was born in Mexico City. And so we have a Spanish heritage behind us. And we grew up very close with one another. We were always taught that family is very important. We were always taught that we need to be there for one another. And it was always taught behind a biblical stance of where the same way we're going to love each other, we should love others. That we should be able to express our feelings, we should be able to express our joy and how we get along with one another. And if it's something you will encounter in our services, is that we're a very hugging family. And so what that means is if you're coming to our services, you're getting hugged too. And so there's no lacking of hugs, of feeling welcomed, of feeling at home. And it's something that we truly want everyone to feel, that they've been embraced, that this is not just our home, but it is God's home. And that we want everyone to just feel like this is where I belong.
Mm-hmm. I was recently at your stepfather's birthday party.
Yes.
And family members were there from Calgary, your nieces, and it was just a beautiful experience to see the love that, like you're saying, it just flows from your family to the congregation. It's an atmosphere where people feel comfortable and safe, and many times I've observed your nieces and just running into your arms and just wanting to be there, and that's a sign. When I often think about Jesus, right?
Yes.
And the little children that he wanted the little children to come to him. And so I think that is so clear with your family and with yourself and some of the things that you guys are offering to the community. So yes.
And it's very important for it to be seen, but also for it to be felt, right? It's not a facade we're trying to put up. It's something that is genuine, something that we're truly just trying to just let it flow and to have the children feel at home and feel safe, right? And my nieces, my cousin's children, and everyone that you've met or seen at least, that's exactly how they felt. They're able to come up to me and in Spanish they say tío, which means uncle. And so they know me already, and they come up to me, and like you said, they'll even run up to me because they know that I love them. They know that um, that has been expressed to them. But you know what's more genuine is that when a child does it back to an adult, because then you know that it's genuine, not that it's not from us, but they're so innocent that when they do it back, or they come and they just hug me, or they come and even give me a kiss on the cheek, I just feel so special. I'm like, wow, they truly love me or care for me as well.
Yeah. So how does that relate to your childhood and to where your experience growing up?
Right. It relates to, a lot of it comes from my mother, right? Because we were, for only a span of about 10 years, was I with my mother and my father. And then once the absence of my father came, we picked up a lot of characteristics from my mother, who, if you meet her today, she's a very hugging person, very loving person, and it's hard not to love her. And so growing up with her, she always taught us that we need to be like Christ. We need to show people that, hey, the world might be negative, the world might be down, the world might be even in flames, but when they come and meet us, they can feel the sense of hope that is found in Christ. That they can feel like, hey, there is love here. Because we come from a broken household, we come from a broken place. And it starts with my mother's past that then she didn't want to pass on to us. And even though we come from that broken home, what we knew we wanted to at least show is that if everything went wrong, we knew in our hearts that at least we still have Christ. That the most important thing is that when people meet us, it will be as if they've met Christ. Because that's what it's like carrying the light in us. And so we just wanted everyone to know, hey, we know how the world goes. We know the bad times. We've seen it for ourselves. But we also know what life is with Christ. And so we know what it's like to not have. We know what it's like to grow up in the North End where we were brought up. We know what it's like living in those habitat homes, which is what we were given, and that environment. And so it taught us valuable lessons of that it doesn't matter the environment, but it also matters the upbringing. It matters what you're taught at home, what your parents are going to instill in your heart and in your mind.
So just so that there's some ability to relate, like when we go into sometimes when we go into our communities in the north or even here in the city, in my community in Alberta, sometimes you see a lot of evidence maybe of family violence or addiction or like anywhere you go in the city there would probably be food insecurity, things like that. So were those some of the things that you battled with as a child in, say, before you came to Canada, and they were also barriers here in Canada?
Definitely. I mean, my parents married young, and so they came here at a young age. And coming here, I guess my father has stepped into the addictions of alcohol and drinking, and from that comes the negative sides of where alcohol changes the personality of people, it changes the characteristics, and that's what would happen. And so, because of the addiction to this alcohol, it affected our household. It affected us as kids. It affected us seeing the violence behind it, the abuse that would come from it. And I'm the oldest in my family, and my siblings, my two sisters, um, are both younger than me. We're 1 year separate apart. And growing up and seeing this, I always felt like, because of the abuse and the violence around the home, I felt like it was my duty and role to protect my sisters, just watch over them and just make sure that no one would hurt them, that they would feel still safe, that if they didn't have at least a protective father when he wasn't drunk, because when he wasn't drunk, he was a very different person. He was very nice, he was very outgoing, he was thoughtful, and he showed us a good time. It was just more when he would enter into that drunken state that it would kind of change. And so we had to fight against the not drunk dad and the drunk dad, the abusive dad and the not abusive dad. And as a child, it almost as if it instills in you, is this normal? Is this how life is? And is this how we're going to be? And it affects you as a child, and at least it affected me, because you'd think that sometimes maybe it'll revert you from wanting to drink or wanting to even find any of those vices. But when I got a little bit older and into my teenage age, instead it pushed me into it.
As a child, so if you're busy surviving and taking care of your younger sister and your family, you're carrying this heavy load. Do you feel like it stole your childhood in a sense?
Absolutely. You know, it was something that as a young child and a teenager, not only did I blame my father, but I also blamed God and saying, you did this to us. I was too young to comprehend the things that happen in a family, the things that break up a family, and how it kind of functions. And I was too young to understand it, that instead all I could think of is, well, how could bad things happen to good people? Because I just thought, well, we're in church. And we grew up in a church household, and we grew up believing in Christ and knowing that Jesus is our protector. And in all of this, it kind of builds up this mind state that, well, then everything's going to be perfect. And in reality, we got a reality check in that, no, is that we will go through some tough times. We will go through some tough eras in our life that are going to teach us valuable lessons. And so it was definitely a feeling of where I actually said to God and said, you took my father, and not only my father, but my childhood. Because at a very young age, I had to learn to cook. I had to learn to clean. I had to learn to maintain the home, at least as a place, and have my sisters, okay, you're going to clean this part, and my other sister this part. And we all kind of became like a little team that, okay, we're going to help one another in order for this to work.
And this was all in support so that your mom could kind of fill the role that your dad in terms of working and providing for you. Okay.
Exactly, because it was so tough for her as a single mother raising 3 children to be around as much as she probably wanted to be. Because I know that she tried, and we appreciate her effort. But it was very difficult because she had to pay everything on her own. Once my father left, she was left with burdens of all the bills to herself. The vehicle that they had just purchased now was just on her. And all of it just accumulated as to this one big problem, that it wasn't until at a later age we realized that the very same problem that we didn't like or wanted to be in became a blessing. And in saying that, it was because everything that my mother had to pay off, I guess we would say, it then later benefited her with the banks. Because then once she did it and got through all the payments and never was late, then they offered her more credit. They offered her credit to buy a home. They offered her a credit to, I guess, progress further in this life with her children. But during that time, it took for her to be working. It took for her to be at work, and she was calling us almost every hour, just at home, to just check how we were doing, everything okay. And so you could see the urgency of wanting to be there, but not being able to be physically. And so that was very difficult as children, right?
And this was in Canada, right? So the time frame from you coming to Canada, you were how old when you got here?
When I arrived to Canada, I was about, I think, 6 to 9 months old.
Okay, so you're very young, and then this was through your teenage years that you guys were doing a lot of the survival, the struggle,
Yes.
and overcoming things. So when you would look at people at school or family members or even people in society, could you tell there was a difference?
Absolutely. And the way that the system, I guess, around us shows us is that we lose our joy in comparison because we're looking what others have and what we don't have. And that was something very difficult for, at least I would say for me, in seeing at least my friends or the people that I knew that had both their parents, what they were able to get them, right? And the holidays they were able to celebrate, and coming together, the gifts, and so yes, it's very materialistic in a way, but as a child it's like it's something that's given to them as a kid, and it's something we do till today. The children get toys, they get clothing, they get shoes, and they're almost in a sense spoiled. And so we were like, why aren't we getting spoiled? Why aren't we getting this same treatment? And we knew as well, because my mother can't do it on her own. But even though the knowing of, it still doesn't remove that feeling of the lacking of, and seeing that, wow, like, why can't we have this? And we're too young to comprehend. And if I couldn't comprehend, and my sisters were younger than me, so it was even harder for them to comprehend what was happening.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. When we come back, we're going to go into another part of your story. And that part of your story really lays the foundation for why that urgency was there with your mom.
Yes.
Why the desperation to make sure that you were okay all the time, and that you as a family were protected and taken care of. And I really believe that the grounding that you received through, like you said, her example was to instill Christ in you, in your life, was rooted and grounded in her faith. And so not only was she, like you said, doing the work to break chains, to make sure things were different for you financially, but she was also trying to break chains to stop this next generation, her children and her grandchildren, from having to face hardships and addiction. And part of that was coming to this country, coming out of where you were living originally. So we're going to go and share about that next time, Pastor. And thank you so much for joining us and being here today.
Thank you for having me.